Israel over the weekend saw one of the worst spates of violence that it has seen in its history. Over 700 Israeli citizens were dead in what is a coordinated attack that happened at over 20 different locations in the south, in the west, and in the north. Innocent civilians, women and children, the elderly were all the target of Hamas terrorists. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed a price that will be unprecedented, that Hamas will not be able to launch, not even be able to think about launching something like this for the next 50 years. Now, there are reports of Hezbollah attacks in some parts of the Israeli border as well. There are also reports of Hamas thanking the Iranian regime for the logistical and other support that they have provided Hamas in Saturday's attack. Does the entire Middle East now run the risk of getting caught in a wider regional conflict? Already, this seemingly big deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel is coming unstuck. Something that was brokered by the United States is already coming unstuck after Saturday's unprecedented attacks. But what may this mean for a region where Israel was trying to normalize its ties with its Arab neighbors, but now suddenly are the old fault lines thrown bare open? But first, the story.
Hamas. In this moment of tragedy, I want to say to them and to the world and to terrorists everywhere that the United States stands with Israel. We will not ever fail to have their back. We'll make sure that they have the help their citizens need and they can continue to defend themselves.
That Hamas and the people that support Hamas are fully responsible for appalling acts of terrorism. We should call it out for what it is. Citizens of Israel are being murdered, innocent people have been kidnapped, including children. Obviously, that's shocking and it's horrifying, and they should be held accountable for that. And what I've said to the Israeli Prime Minister is that we will provide all the support that they need.
Aber auch wir in Deutschland müssen nun besonders wachsam sein. Wir müssen das jüdische Leben in unserem Land schützen und uns stark und entschlossen gegen jede Form von Antisemitismus und Israel-Hass stellen. Wir können es nicht dulden, wenn auf offener Straße versucht wird, die brutalen Attacken auf Israel auch noch zu feiern.
Israelis themselves, Israeli journalists who were here in Ukraine, who were in Bucha, are now seeing that they saw the same evil where Russia came.
Необходимо не только срочно остановить боестолкновение, решить проблему с гражданскими лицами, которые в огромном количестве становятся жертвами нынешней ситуации, но и уделить особое внимание причинам, по которым палестинская проблема долгие десятилетия не может найти своего решения, хотя на этот счет есть.
All right, so what has Israel's response so far been to this unprecedented Hamas attack? In scale, in breadth, in the depth in which these attacks happened, it's been fairly unprecedented. Now, it formally has declared war, not an operation, not a round, as the Prime Minister called it, but full-fledged war against the enemy by invoking Article 40 of Aleph. Now, airstrikes have been pounding the Palestinian enclave of Gaza Strip. It's a small enclave, more than 2 million people there. It's been pounding since Saturday afternoon. Air Force targets have gone directly at Hamas leadership and the strongholds. Many Hamas buildings have been reduced to rubble in the Gaza Strip. The ground forces are battling to retake border villages and towns. Remember, one of the things that the Hamas terrorists did was to capture households in border villages and towns, take people hostage, reportedly taken back something like 300 hostages, many of whom have been freed now. Drafts to a record of 300,000 reservists for counter-offensive. That clearly indicates that Israel is preparing for a massive ground operation. It's also begun a blockade. There's no electricity going into Gaza. There's no food and water supplies going into Gaza. It is cutting off all essential supplies into the Gaza Strip to try and begin this massive ground offensive. Also, what we're given to understand is that one conflict and two different stands that have been taken here in India for perhaps domestic political reasons. Remember, the Prime Minister was one of the first to come out, and he tweeted this on the social media platform X. He said straight away within the first few hours that he was deeply shocked by the news of the terrorist attacks in Israel, and that the people of India stand by the people of Israel and the victims of terrorism. He said that our prayers and our thoughts are with the innocent victims and their families. We stand in solidarity with Israel at this difficult hour. The Congress party also initially echoed that sentiment, but today the Congress Working Committee, which met, slightly changed its tune. It reiterated its long-standing support for the rights of the Palestinian people to land, self-government, and to live with dignity and respect. So clearly, there's a difference in how the BJP has approached what we saw on Saturday, the terrorist attack and its repercussions, its support for Israel. The Prime Minister being absolutely clear about the support for Israel and the Israeli people and the victims of terrorism. There was no unnecessary trying to balance the two-state solution or the Palestinian cause, etc. Whereas the Congress party today, after its CWC, issuing a statement which reminds people of the Palestinian people's right to self-government and eventually a move towards a viable two-state solution. Let me now open this up. How much harder does it make this whole business of a two-state solution? Because what we saw, the pictures that we saw on Saturday, were not Israeli security forces or IDF personnel being targeted. It was women, children, elderly, many of them being taken hostage, many of them being killed brutally. That is not something any civilized country or society can stand idly by and watch. Aydin Roll is an Israeli member of parliament. Amichai Stein is a journalist based in Tel Aviv. Dr. Maher Javed Nafar is a Middle East analyst. Mohammad Marandi is a political analyst in Iranian affairs, and Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti is former deputy chief of mission in Tel Aviv in Israel. Let me now start with Aydin Roll. First things are our sympathies, our thoughts and prayers with all the victims in Israel of this dastardly coordinated set of attacks. 48 hours on, what are you learning, Mr. Aydin Roll, about the role of Hamas, the people who have supported Hamas in carrying out such coordinated attacks, whether it's the Hezbollah or whether it's the so-called Iranian hand? What do we know 48 hours after these attacks took place?
Well, let me first thank you for your kind words on behalf of Israel.
Sorry.
I want the audience to understand, I want to address what you said about what Hamas as a terror organization is all about. People should not be confusing Hamas for any sort of a liberation movement or any sort of an organization which aims to solve all kinds of issues or rights for Palestinians. Hamas is a terror organization with a declared purpose and cause to kill all Israelis and annihilate the state of Israel. When we are facing a terror organization just like ISIS that rapes, murders, kidnaps babies and their young moms and holds them hostage, burns villages and houses with the people inside, that's no way of trying to approach in means of diplomacy or any other type of discussion. That is a terror organization that we as a country, that needs to protect its people and our borders. We have to strike back, and I urge the international community to stand by Israel in this tough time. And remember that terror doesn't distinguish between different nationalities. This is a murderous terror organization, and we are obligated and have the right to protect our people and make sure that they can no longer attack us.
Amichai Stein, if you're there, what is the most plausible explanation that you have come across in the last 2 days as you process these remarkable events that have unfolded in different parts of Israel, in at least 20 different locations, if not more? just why would Hamas resort to something like this? I've seen, explanations about how this is to try and throw a spanner in the works about that possible rapprochement, this deal that was being cut between Riyadh and Tel Aviv. But that doesn't fully explain to me the scale of such attacks. Amichai Stein. All right, we lost Amichai Stein. Let me put that question then to Dr. Maher Javed Nafar. Because the last big attack that we saw, the last big flare-up between Israel and Hamas, happened sometime in 2016-17. We haven't seen something of this nature, this scale, in a number of years, in a number of decades. So what is the best plausible explanation for why Hamas has done what it has done? Because surely it has to be prepared for the blowback as a result.
Yeah, exactly, and this is why this is why Israel did not have a lot of forces on the border at that time, because in Israel the belief existed that the Gazan economy was getting better. 18,000 Gazans were coming to work in Israel every day. They were injecting $2 million into the Gazan economy, and that Hamas would not risk basically destroying the Gazan economy and wrecking Gaza by starting a war, and not just a war, the biggest massacre of civilians in Israeli history. No one believed that Hamas would do this. But we were wrong that Hamas was not going to risk the welfare of Palestinians. It has, and Hamas exactly knew that this would be the response. And I think one of the reasons is because, as you said, it's because it does not want Israel and Saudi Arabia to repair relations. This is, by the way, something done before during the Gulf War in the 1990s when America was attacking Iraq in order to basically to discredit America and to try to drag Israel into war. Saddam Hussein started firing missiles at Israel with the hope that Israel would enter the war against Iraq, thus making it more difficult for America to attack Iraq in that war and to expel it from Kuwait. It's from the same playbook. Now Hamas is doing the same. Whether it's taking direct orders from Islamic Republic of Iran, I don't know. But what I can say is this certainly serves the interests of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Ayatollah Khamenei himself was very angry. He warned countries against, especially meaning Saudi Arabia, against improving relations with Israel. And I think this is a major reason why Hamas did this. There's another minor reason as well, is that because Hamas wants to portray itself as the only side in Palestinian politics that's prepared to confront Israel militarily. That is true. I mean, nobody has confronted Israel militarily like Hamas, but judging from the results of its actions, nobody has caused more damage to the economic well-being of Palestinians like Hamas.
Okay. Mohammad Marandi is a political analyst specializing in Iranian affairs. Now, there is no direct evidence, certainly no smoking gun evidence of a possible Iranian hand in what happened on Saturday, but there are reports of Hamas representatives thanking Iran for its logistical support, its moral support, for helping them carry out these executions, for helping them carry out these terrorist attacks. And the point that the previous speaker made, I think, is well taken. One of the few countries in that region that would benefit politically because of this attack and to try and scuttle the rapprochement that was brewing between Israel and its neighbors, its Arab neighbors, particularly with Saudi Arabia being the biggest Arab country there. What it does is Iran really throws a spanner in those works. Do you believe that Hamas could not have pulled this off without either direct or indirect support from Iran and the regime there?
Well, first, I have to say that out of respect, I am staying in the panel. I was told that I will not be on a panel with Israeli citizens because they are there illegally. It is an apartheid state. And I said I will debate with supporters of the regime, but not with those who have occupied that country and have forced Palestinians into exile. The people of Gaza are people who've been ethnically cleansed from Palestine and have been forced into what used to be a village. And the revolution in Iran from the very beginning was opposed to two key political realities in the world. One was it was opposed to apartheid South Africa because something similar had happened there. And that was white supremacists had imposed apartheid on the people of Africa, the people of Southern Africa, not just in South Africa itself, but in the Southern African region. And the second one was, of course, the issue of Palestine, something which the non-aligned movement and the Indian government has always had a tradition of supporting the rights of the Palestinian people and the right of return. Millions of Palestinians are living in refugee camps outside of Palestine, and millions are living in concentration camps inside.
But Mr. Marandi, how are those rights advanced in any form or fashion by taking old women as hostages, by attacking and killing children, by attacking a music festival? Every single target of Saturday's attack, and there were more than 24 of them, were civilians. How does it justify whatever grievances you may have about the plight of the Palestinian people, about the plight of people in Gaza, if Hamas were to attack innocent Israeli citizens who have nothing to do with this conflict?
Well, all Israeli citizens who serve in the army of Israel and enforce apartheid and support the apartheid system are guilty. But the Palestinians do not have the luxury of being able to carry out airstrikes on targets of the apartheid regime because in Gaza, 2 million people are in the world's largest concentration camp. These people are prevented from gaining access to clean water. They're prevented from accessing decent livelihood, medicine. People who have cancer die of their cancer because they can't access hospitals or medicine.
Okay.
Right now, the apartheid regime has cut off the electricity for 2 million people. They're bombing civilian targets, towers where 100 apartments in one tower destroyed.
But Mr. Marandi, no one is justifying attacking civilians on either side. But you still haven't answered my question as to what Hamas or the Palestinian cause, how is it advanced with Hamas attacking Israeli innocent civilians? But let me go across to Ambassador. One second. Of course they are. One of the people who was abducted was an 85-year-old grandmother. I mean, what are you going to gain by attacking her?
Okay, let me explain.
One of the people who was attacked was a 6-year-old girl. For God's sake, what are you going to gain by attacking them?
Those families should not allow their children to be in occupied territory.
No, I'm sorry. I don't think you can extract the price of blood. No, you cannot extract the price of blood by putting innocent civilians in the path of war. I'm sorry, Mr. Marandi. I think a basic civilization, basic civilized discourse entails that civilians are kept out of this. But let me ask Ambassador Chakravarti. Let me just move away. Let me just move away from Mr. Marandi. Ambassador Chakravarti, one of the things that's also happened, and I referred to this in my opening comments, the sort of contrasting reactions we've seen here in India as well. The Prime Minister was very quick, one of the first world leaders to come out and unequivocally say that this is condemnable. We stand with the people of Israel. We stand with the victims of terrorism. But the Congress party today, after their CWC, had to do that balancing act about, while we stand with the victims of terror, at the same time the Palestinian people about their right to self-government and the right to their lands, etc. This balancing thing that India and Indian foreign policy had been doing for a good 50, 60 years, after the events of Saturday, has the time come to take a long, hard look at that? And also because of the ever-intensive sort of partnership and collaboration that New Delhi and Tel Aviv have, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years or so?
Well, I think one has to go back a little bit in time because after the Oslo Accords, when the PLO and Yasser Arafat and all signed the peace agreements, everybody thought that that we were near a solution and that the two-state solution would happen, etc. We opened our diplomatic mission. Don't forget that previous governments in India did not allow diplomatic relations with Israel till 1991. And I remember that I was a member of the Indian embassy there in Tel Aviv. And this happened after the Oslo Accords. We thought things would work out, but it didn't. And for whatever reasons, it was not because of India, but for local reasons there. So I would say that India, particularly India, had taken a step hoping, because we had always supported the Palestinian cause, and that is why we had shunned Israel. But the fact is that geopolitics dictate nations' policies sometimes when the world changes. So when the Oslo Accords took place, India decided that if Egypt, Jordan, and others can have diplomatic missions in Israel, why can't India? And that's how we went there. Now things changed in Israel or in that region, and the Palestinians broke up into Gaza and the West Bank with the Hamas taking over. And Hamas is not a very peaceful organization. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
And the Palestinian Authority, or the Fatah, which did the peace deal, was left in the West Bank. So this was the situation that they had to sort it out, but they could not. Hamas and Palestinian Authority could not sort it out, and the peace negotiations went nowhere. Meanwhile, Israel took advantage, and I must admit they did take advantage, and they kept nibbling away at Palestinian territories in the West Bank and reducing the Palestinians to pockets in the West Bank. If you look at the map of the West Bank, where the Palestinians are concentrated, they are in about 240 odd enclaves, and the rest of it Israel has taken over. So I think this is the problem, in the sense that the Palestinians have felt increasingly bitter and cheated, after they actually entered into a peace agreement. So they have their own grievance. But coming to the present, outburst, as I would call it, there are several reasons, and it's not just internal to Israel and Palestine. I think there are external geopolitical factors as well. Don't forget that if Saudi Arabia normalizes with Israel, the rest of the Muslim world will find it very difficult to support the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And that is one of the factors that must have dictated Iran. And Iran is, of course, a player there. And Iran has been supporting Hezbollah and others, because Iran doesn't recognize Israel. And Iran's stated policy is to wipe out Israel from the face of the map. This is their stated policy. And so you are dealing with a situation where you have this Iranian policy, which, by the way, with Iran also follows a bit of apartheid, but in a different way in terms of treating the women of Iran. But then that is another issue. So I would say that this is an outburst which I think the Hamas felt that its relevance was reducing, and Iran encouraged it to some extent, and they felt that this was the right time to act, and because of the geopolitics of the region, and because it would sort of stop the reconciliation between Israel and the other Arab countries.
I also want to go across to Ephraim in Bar, who's joining us from Israel. And of course, regularly over the last 48 hours since these attacks began, we've been hearing sirens going off, citizens there being advised to go to bomb shelters. So Ephraim, thank you very much for joining us. Can you just tell us about what it is like right now in Jerusalem, where you're joining us from? We were speaking to people through the course of the last couple of days, and they were saying that there are regularly sirens going off, people being advised to go into bomb shelters. What is the information that you're receiving from the government, and how has it been over the last 2 to 3 days since these attacks began Saturday morning?
In Jerusalem, it is quiet. Usually the missiles that are being launched by Hamas toward Jerusalem are being intercepted. Life is almost normal. Schools are closed for the time being.
Yeah.
And the mood is rather gloomy because of the heavy price we paid yesterday because of the Hamas attack.
So now it seems, Ephraim, that the government of Israel is getting ready for a massive ground offensive. Already we are seeing targeted strikes, rocket strikes on buildings that house Hamas leaders, etc. Gaza has about 2 million people. A large number of them, of course, are sympathetic to Hamas, and Hamas has to pay a price, in the words of the Israeli Prime Minister, an unprecedented price. But can you tell us more about what is the thinking in Israel in terms of this ground invasion? Because it seems like the prevailing mood in the country is there has to be a deterrent price that Hamas has to pay for what it did on Saturday.
Unfortunately, Hamas is popular among the Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, more than in the West Bank. And this is, of course, a source of concern for Israelis because the ideology of Hamas requires the destruction of the Jewish state, which makes it an implacable enemy of the state. We succeeded somehow to contain Hamas hostility and violent acts so far, but what we've seen yesterday is unprecedented level of violence against us, and I don't think that Israel can no longer tolerate this barbaric organization.
So that seems to be the overriding sentiment in Israel. Let me go back to Dr. Javed Anfar. Just to take this forward, Dr. Javed Anfar, what is the next step here? Yes, there is a ground invasion. Yes, much of Gaza is going to be razed down to the ground. But how is this going to move further? Because two things. One, Benjamin Netanyahu is now being accused, including by mainstream press in Israel, of oversight. He was completely consumed by this political crisis, the judiciary versus the government there. Perhaps there was oversight. There was clearly a massive intelligence failure and a massive military failure which didn't see this coming. So what's the political cost to pay for that? And two, more importantly, ultimately, yes, you can go in there, you can kill as many Hamas people as you want. There will be a lot of civilian collateral damage. But ultimately, what's the solution to this? What's the next step? What is a more lasting and durable peace in Israel and for Israel look like from Gaza?
If I may start with the second question, what is the best solution for the future? Ambassador Chakravarti was here when Israel, rightly so, was returning occupied territories to the Palestinians after Oslo. And I'm always been a believer in two states for two people solution, and I've always believed that economic prosperity and political stability and national identity is one of the ways to make sure that wars no longer break out between us and the Palestinians. But as Ambassador Chakravarti also, I'm sure, remembers, sir, when this solution has ultimately, and I say this with a lot of sorrow, has failed. Because the more land, every time we gave land back, there was all these suicide bombings. People were killed in cafes. People were killed in buses. This was in 1993. In 2005, me and many other Israelis, including Mr. Netanyahu himself, voted in favor of Israel withdrawing from Gaza. Why? We were hoping that, again, we're going to withdraw. There's going to be economic stability. We turned a piece of desert in 1948 into a functioning country. So we're hoping, okay, so we will also withdraw from Gaza, and hopefully the Palestinian leadership will use the opportunity to start developing the future. What did we get instead? We've had missiles and non-stop war. Okay. So what is the solution? I have to say, unfortunately, I have to say probably there's going to be a Palestinian provisional state in West Bank. But in terms of in Gaza, after these recent events, I really don't see how they're going to be part of the solution in the future. And I think Hamas killed the prospects of an independent Palestinian state alongside those 700 Israelis. In terms of the political cost, I'll be very brief. I think it's too early to say. I'm a critic of Mr. Netanyahu. I've been to at least half of the 39 demonstrations against him. At this time, people are putting politics aside. Once this is over, then we're going to have to start looking for those responsible inside Israel. And I think Mr. Netanyahu's judicial reform is one of the culprits, because it made us look weak, and that only encouraged our enemies.
All right, Ambassador Chakrabarti, I'll give you the final word. People always flag this asymmetry of power, the power differential. Israel is a state; it goes after these guerrillas as they are portrayed. But there is also a moral problem here. Where every time there's been some form of normalization, and the good doctor just elucidated that just moments ago. Every time there's been an attempt at normalization, there have been violent attacks from the other side. The first intifada, the second intifada, and almost invariably it was civilians who were targeted in these jihadi strikes. I mean, why does no one talk about that? If you have a political problem, if you have a problem with the state of Israel and the government of Israel, you deal with them. But how does, taking 80-year-olds hostage help move forward the Palestinian cause?
Well, I tend to agree with the good doctor, as you called him, and because I was there when the Dizengoff bombings took place. I was there when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, because there were Israelis who did not like the peace deal, and it led to the assassination of a prime minister. And I was there when Benjamin Netanyahu first became prime minister of Israel. I remember those days, and I think mistakes have been made on both sides. And to the extent that both sides may have tried, to reach a deal, but there were militants or extremists on both sides who probably didn't want that solution. And I'm speculating, but facts speak for themselves. I mean, who killed Yitzhak Rabin, for example? I mean, the prime minister of Israel at that time, who did the peace deal. Those who killed him obviously didn't want the peace. That is the only rational explanation. And similarly, as Dr. Saab has said, that there were others on the Palestinian side who didn't want the peace deal because they didn't recognize Israel. They said Israel has no right to exist. This is Palestine, and there should be nobody else here. And it is a Palestinian state. That's the dilemma.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much to our guests. Like I said, what has been unleashed is yet another war, a war which I'm not sure the world can afford right now. But any civilized country, looking at those images of terrorists coming in paraglides, by speedboats, by pickup trucks, and targeting civilians, women, children, civilians who have nothing to do with this ongoing ideological or, for that matter, political or even military sort of fundamental clash between the Israelis and Palestinians, taking them as hostage, killing them in the most brutal fashion, and then using those videos as propaganda. No civilized state can just sit idly by with its hands tied, looking at these images. So any state would want to be responding and be seen as responding to raise the cost of deterrence. But